Trust no one wearing the tiger. Naomi saw the message too late to keep the tall man from stepping closer, but not too late to understand that his mistake was assuming a tired mother with stitches under her dress would behave like prey once trapped. She shifted Mina higher against her chest, letting the donated blanket hide the angle of her right hand as it closed around the church bulletin Miss Laverne had folded around the kitchen knife. Denise stood beside the van with Malik strapped against her in a cloth carrier, her face drained of color, but her feet planted wide. And Naomi noticed the small things fear had trained her to read. The second man kept glancing toward the street instead of the babies. The sedan's rear window was cracked open, though nobody sat visibly inside, and the tall one had used Mrs. Han with too much confidence, as if the name itself were supposed to make her obey. "You're not Seojin's men," Naomi said, keeping her voice low enough that Mina did not startle, and the tall man's polite expression tightened around the edges because he had expected crying, bargaining, maybe anger, but not identification. "If the Han Council sent you, then you already know I'm not handing my children to a committee of old men who drafted papers before they even knew their names." The man's eyes moved once to the bundle against Denise's chest, and Denise stepped backward until the van door pressed into her shoulder blades. He did not reach for a weapon, which told Naomi he had been ordered to keep the scene clean. No blood in an alley behind a church thrift shop. No screaming witnesses. No dead mother that would turn a succession problem into a scandal large enough to crack the polished face of the Han Foundation. That meant, for the first time all night, his rules limited him more than hers. The thrift shop door behind them opened again, not wide, just enough for Miss Laverne to push out a rolling metal rack stacked with donated winter coats. She moved slowly, muttering about storage space in a voice loud enough to sound harmless and irritated enough to sound ordinary. The rack squealed across the wet pavement, its bad will jerking every few inches, and for the half-second both councilmen looked toward the sound. Naomi moved. She did not lunge like a woman in a movie. Her body was too sore, too heavy, too newly postpartum for anything clean or graceful. She rammed her shoulder into the tall man's chest with every kilogram and every month of fear behind it, driving him backward into the open sedan door hard enough to knock the air from him. Denise yanked the van's side door open, shoved the diaper bag inside, and climbed in with Malik while Miss Laverne swung the coat rack sideways, sending plastic hangers and old wool coats collapsing between the second man and the van like a ridiculous, perfect barricade. Naomi nearly fell getting into the passenger seat. Pain tore bright and hot across her abdomen, and for 1/6 second she thought the incision had opened badly enough to stop her from moving. Mina began to cry against her chest, a thin, furious sound that cut through the alley and steadied her more than silence could have. The deacon driving the van, a broad-shouldered man named Earl who had been told only that a woman and 2 newborns needed a ride away from trouble, slammed the gear shift into reverse before Naomi had both feet inside. The van clipped a trash can, scraped brick, and lurched backward into the street, while Miss Laverne stood in the alley entrance with both hands on her hips, shouting at the councilmen about damaging church donations as if outrage itself were a weapon she had sharpened for 70 years. They did not get far cleanly. 3 blocks from the salon, a second sedan pulled out from a gas station and followed without headlights, its shape floating in the rain-dark rear window like a thought Naomi could not shake loose. Denise saw it too and pressed one hand over Malik's back as if her palm alone could hide him from view. Earl kept both hands on the wheel and asked no questions, which made Naomi trust him more than any promise would have. She used Denise's cracked phone to call Hayrin, but the line failed twice before connecting, and when it did, Hayrin spoke first with no greeting. Seojin had landed outside Savannah, she said, and Min Q was alive but restrained, which meant the advisor could still be used to open doors the council believed were closed. The archive stamp had to be taken before dawn Seoul time, because once the elders learned Seojin had diverted, they would burn the original and leave only copies they could call foreign lies. Naomi looked at the highway signs sliding past in the rain and understood that Seojin's battle was no longer simply reaching Atlanta. His real fight had moved back to Korea, into foundation basements, ancestral seals, council minutes, and old men who could erase children with paper while pretending their hands were clean. Her fight was here, Inside a rattling food pantry van with 2 newborns, a bleeding wound, and a sedan gaining on them under the yellow pulse of traffic lights. "Tell him not to come straight to me," Naomi said, and Denise turned toward her sharply. But Naomi kept speaking before love could become argument. "If he comes here first, they keep control of the paper. If he gets the stamp first, they lose the legal trap. I can keep moving until then." Hei-rin did not answer immediately, and in that pause Naomi heard the risk being measured by someone who finally respected her enough not to soften it. Earl took them off the main road and into a neighborhood of low warehouses, tire shops, and shuttered seafood markets where the rainwater gathered in silver sheets over broken asphalt. The pursuing sedan followed. Naomi unwrapped the church bulletin and looked down at the kitchen knife, then at Mina's wet cheeks, then at Denise whispering nonsense into Malik's hair with a steadiness she did not owe anyone, but kept giving anyway. She hated Seojin in that moment for every locked door that had helped build this night, but she also understood with a bitter clarity that hate was not a plan. "There's a courier depot by the old rail spur," Earl said, eyes fixed on the mirror. "Medical drivers swap coolers there at night. Cameras everywhere, floodlights too. If they want quiet, they won't like it." Naomi nodded, because public light was the only shield she could afford. On the plane hangar outside Savannah, Seojin received Hei-rin's relayed message while standing over Min-kyu in a maintenance office that smelled of jet fuel, burnt coffee, and wet concrete. His security chief had found 2 council codes in Min-kyu's watch and a 3rd hidden beneath the lining of his passport cover. The old advisor, stripped of his jacket and dignity, but not his composure, smiled when Seojin ordered a secure route into the Han Foundation archive. "You still think the stamp saves them," Min-kyu said, his voice hoarse from silence rather than fear. "The council does not need truth if it controls shame. They will say she hid the children for money. They will say the twins are unverified. They will say you were compromised by an American woman who learned too much in your bed." Seojin leaned over him, and, for the first time since the photograph arrived, let the old man see the difference between rage and decision. "Then I will make shame more expensive than truth." The depot lights appeared ahead through the rain, white and harsh, turning every puddle into a mirror. Earl drove straight toward the loading bay where 3 medical vans idled beneath cameras bolted to steel beams. The sedan behind them accelerated, not enough to ram, just enough to force a choice before they reached witnesses. Naomi saw the move forming and made hers first. She rolled down the window, held Mina close with one arm, and threw the freezer bag containing the embroidered tiger cloth out into the open lane where it slapped against the wet pavement beneath the depot floodlights. The sedan braked hard. One of the men jumped out to retrieve it, because the cloth connected the council to the alley and mattered more than they wanted exposed. In the seconds they lost, Earl swung the food pantry van into the loading bay, and every camera above the depot turned their terror into evidence. Naomi climbed out before Denise could stop her, one hand pressed against the pain in her abdomen, the other holding Mina under the blanket as rain flattened her dress against her full body and washed blood from the hem into the concrete water at her feet. The council sedan stopped at the edge of the lot, trapped between retreat and witnesses, while drivers in reflective vests turned to stare. Naomi lifted Denise's phone and began recording, not the men's faces alone but the tiger pin, the license plate, the recovered cloth in the man's hand, and her own voice naming the Han Council in English, so clearly no translator could later bury the meaning. At that exact moment, her phone buzzed with a live image from Hei-rin in Seoul, Seojin standing inside the Foundation archive with the original injunction in his hand, while behind him an elder reached toward a ceremonial brazier already burning. Seojin standing inside the Foundation archive with the original injunction in his hand, while behind him an elder reached toward a ceremonial brazier already burning. Naomi's recording caught her own breath hitching when the image arrived, and for one dangerous second the council men across the depot lot saw the tiny crack in her composure they had been waiting for. They moved at the same time, one stepping toward her with both hands open in that careful institutional way powerful men use when they want witnesses to see restraint and victims to feel threat. Naomi did not lower the phone. She turned the camera fully on him, letting the depot lights show the tiger pin, the wet cloth in his grip, and the way his eyes kept flicking toward Mina's blanket as if the baby were an object he still intended to collect once the public discomfort passed. "You are being recorded," Naomi said, her voice strained but steady enough to carry across the concrete, and the sentence landed harder because it was not shouted. "My name is Naomi Brooks. My children are Malik and Mina Brooks. These men followed us from a church property after identifying themselves with the Han Council emblem, and one of them is holding cloth evidence left at the scene where they tried to take us." A medical courier in a yellow vest lifted his own phone. Then another did. The council men understood the arithmetic of exposure at the same time Naomi did, because every camera changed the shape of the room even when the room was an open loading bay under rain. They could still lie later, but they could no longer create a clean disappearance tonight. In Seoul, the archive room smelled of cedar drawers, old paper, and smoke from the brazier where the elder had already burned 2 lesser documents before Sejin forced the door. Haerin had gone through a basement service entrance with a borrowed security badge and a courage that looked less like bravery than family shame finally becoming useful. Seojin's men held the elder back, not roughly enough to draw blood, but firmly enough that the old man's dignity cracked before his bones did. The injunction lay in Seojin's hand with the original council stamp pressed in red at the bottom, naming Naomi unreachable before anyone had tried to reach her, naming Min-kyu temporary guardian before the twins had legally been acknowledged, and leaving blank spaces where Malik and Mina's full names were meant to be inserted once they were separated from their mother. Min-kyu, brought in under guard because his codes had opened the archive door, stood with one cheek bruised and his collar torn, watching the paper as if it were the first honest mirror he had seen in years. Seojin could have destroyed him there in front of the elder, could have made the old advisor kneel on the archive floor where 3 generations of Han men had hidden their dirtiest decisions under ceremonial language. Instead, he handed the document to Haerin and told her to photograph every page, every stamp, every signature, every marginal note, and every burn mark on the papers already in the brazier. When the elder cursed Naomi's name under his breath in Korean, calling her a foreign appetite that had bewitched a weak heir, Seojin crossed the room and struck him once with an open hand, not hard enough to satisfy rage, but hard enough to end the illusion that age would protect him from consequence. The strike was not the point. The order after it was. Seojin had the archive feed open to every senior captain, every foundation trustee, every regional broker who had sworn loyalty to the Han family but had been trained to treat the council as untouchable. He stood in front of the camera with the injunction beside him and named the crime without decoration. The council had conspired with Min-kyu to hide his children, threaten their mother, manufacture grounds to seize guardianship, and invite rival pressure from Jang Ki-moon's network to make the fear look external. No man watching could pretend this was merely domestic disorder, because succession crimes did not stay private in families built on bloodline and obedience. Seojin then did the one thing Min-kyu had never believed he would do. He named Naomi not as an ex-wife, not as a vulnerable woman under his protection, but as the mother whose authority over Malik and Mina stood before every Han elder's ambition until she herself chose otherwise. The effect traveled through the organization faster than any threat could have. Men who had been waiting to see whether the old council or the younger boss would control the next generation began choosing in real time, not because they had become moral, but because Seojin had made the council's position look expensive, unstable, and publicly exposed. Haerin sent the archive evidence to Naomi, to 2 American attorneys, and to a Korean investigative reporter whose father had once been ruined by one of the council's shell charities. Seojin watched the files leave and accepted that there would be damage he could not fully manage. For the first time in his life, control was not the highest priority in the room. The truth had to outrun the men trying to burn it. At the depot, Naomi received the files while Denise sat in the van feeding Malik with shaking hands. The bottle angled wrong until Earl gently corrected it without making her feel foolish. Mina had cried herself quiet against Naomi's shoulder, leaving damp heat against her collarbone. The pain in Naomi's abdomen had become a deep, pulling throb that made the edges of the floodlights blur when she turned too quickly, but she kept standing because sitting down felt too much like surrender while the council men still watched from the edge of the lot. The taller man's phone rang. He listened, his face changing in small, humiliating increments as news from Seoul reached him. And when he looked back at Naomi, the false politeness had been replaced by the bleak calculation of a man whose employer had just lost the authority he had been borrowing. "You don't understand what you've done," he said, quieter now, almost pleading under the anger. "The council will not forgive public shame." Naomi almost laughed, but exhaustion took the shape of something colder. They sent men after newborns and thought shame was still theirs to control. She forwarded the archive files to Denise's phone, Miss Laverne's phone, the courier who had been recording, and the local news producer whose contact she had nearly deleted during her first month in hiding. Then she looked directly into her own recording and added the part the council had tried hardest to erase. That she had never abandoned her children, never hidden them for money, never refused safe contact from Seojin, and had run because every normal channel had been poisoned by men who wanted her frightened, silent, and alone. The police arrived because one of the medical depot supervisors had called them, and the timing made everything messy in exactly the way real danger becomes messy when it collides with public systems. Naomi did not trust uniforms simply because they wore them, but she trusted cameras, witnesses, timestamps, and the fact that the council men could no longer claim a private family matter while standing under floodlights with stolen ceremonial cloth and a dozen phones pointed at their faces. She gave her statement slowly, refusing to let anyone separate her from Mina or Denise from Malik. And when an officer suggested the babies should be checked at a hospital, Naomi agreed only after Earl offered to drive behind the ambulance, and a courier supervisor promised to preserve the security footage before anyone with money could request it disappear. Seojin's call came while Naomi sat in the ambulance doorway with a paramedic taping gauze beneath her dress, where the incision had reopened. Rain dotted the phone screen. His face appeared from the archive room, paler than she remembered, older in a way 10 months could not explain by themselves. Behind him, Haerin moved like a blade through drawers and files, while Min-kyu sat handcuffed to a chair in the corner with the hollow look of a man discovering that betrayal had not made him powerful, only useful for a little while. Seojin did not ask if she was safe, as if the answer could be simple. He looked at the bandage, the baby blanket, the flashing ambulance lights behind her, and said, "I chose wrong every time I kept you outside the room. I am not doing it again. Tell me what you need before I move." Naomi had imagined this conversation in 100 bitter versions during the months when she had warmed bottles alone and blamed his silence for every shadow at the window. None of those versions had included a Korean Mafia boss standing in his own Foundation archive, asking for direction while his family's elders lost power behind him. She wanted to punish him with the truth. She wanted to hand him every lonely night and make him carry it until his knees bent. But Malik and Mina needed more than a beautiful apology, and Naomi had become too practical to mistake pain for strategy. "I need legal protection in America first, public acknowledgement from you second, and no Han family representative near my children unless I approve them by name," she said, each demand shaped by months of being treated as if motherhood made her emotional instead of precise. "And I need Min-kyu alive long enough to testify who signed that order." Seojin accepted every condition without bargaining, which frightened Min-kyu more than shouting would have. The old advisor leaned forward, chains scraping softly against the archive chair, and spoke loudly enough for Naomi to hear through the phone. "If I testify, the council will say I invented it to save myself. And if you protect her publicly, Jang Ki-moon will use the exposure to move against your ports before sunrise." Seojin did not look away from Naomi. "Let him move," he said, and the calm in his voice carried the weight of a man finally spending power on something worth losing territory for. Min-kyu's mouth tightened, not because the answer surprised him, but because it proved he had misunderstood the one weakness he thought he had mastered. Then Haerin opened the bottom drawer of the archive safe and found a second envelope sealed with Naomi's married name, containing a custody surrender form already signed by someone imitating her handwriting. Naomi stared at the screen until the ambulance noise around her seemed to move farther away, because that forged signature was not just another threat. It was the missing shape of the trap they had been building around her for months. Every dead phone line, every watched apartment, every strange car, Every paper crane folded from stolen medical records had been designed to make her look unstable enough to vanish from her own children's legal story. The council had not planned to defeat her with one dramatic act of violence. They had planned to exhaust her into seeming exactly like the desperate woman their document needed her to be. She looked down at Mina, whose tiny fingers had caught the edge of the ambulance blanket, and felt the last soft place inside her harden into something clear enough to use. "Send it to my lawyer and the news producer," Naomi said, and Seo-jin did not ask which lawyer, because by then he had learned that every question could become another delay if it was really just control wearing a better suit. Denise handed over the producer's number with one hand, while still holding Malik's bottle with the other, her face wet with rain and fury, and Naomi made sure the forged surrender form traveled through more than one route before anyone in Seoul could bury it behind family procedure. The paramedic kept telling her she needed to lie back, and Naomi finally did, not because she was finished fighting, but because Mina had begun to tremble from the cold, and because a bleeding mother collapsing on camera would give the council one more picture to twist later. She let the paramedic close the ambulance doors only after Earl promised to follow. Denise climbed in beside her, and the depot supervisor placed a copy of the security footage into 3 separate cloud folders while the council men stood outside under the floodlights, suddenly too visible to be useful to anyone. In Seoul, the forged form changed Min Kyu's face more than the injunction had. The first document proved conspiracy, the second proved intent to steal the children permanently, and it contained a detail only a tired criminal would miss. Naomi's forged signature used the married surname Han, but the divorce settlement had restored her legal name months earlier, a fact buried in a court appendix that Min Kyu had access to but the council secretary apparently had not checked. Seo-jin saw Hae-rin notice the mistake and watched her expression sharpen with the satisfaction of a woman finding the loose thread in an expensive lie. Within the hour, American counsel could challenge the form as fraudulent. Korean counsel could use it to force emergency suspension of the Elders Foundation Authority, and every captain watching the live internal feed could understand that standing with the council now meant attaching himself to a failed kidnapping, a forged custody document, and a public scandal involving newborn heirs. Jang Ki-moon made his move before sunrise, just as Min Kyu had predicted, sending trucks toward 2 Han-controlled port warehouses while anonymous accounts began pushing stories online about Seo-jin's hidden American children and a black ex-wife accused of extortion. It was supposed to split Seo-jin in half, forcing him to choose between territory and family, reputation and truth, the empire his father had left him and the babies he had not yet held. Instead, Seo-jin gave orders that made 3 older captains stare at him as if they had misheard. He let the warehouses go cold, pulled the night crews out, locked the gates remotely, and leaked the approach routes to maritime police through a charity compliance channel the council had once used to launder its own dignity. Jang's trucks arrived at buildings already emptied of anything valuable and surrounded by inspectors, while the anonymous smear campaign collapsed under timestamps Naomi had created herself at the depot, archive images from Hae-rin, and the forged surrender form with the wrong legal name sitting on every journalist's desk before the council could produce its first denial. By the time Seo-jin reached the Atlanta hospital, 26 hours had passed since the baby formula box reached Seoul, and Naomi had slept for exactly 40 minutes under protest. Her incision had been cleaned and closed again. The twins had been examined and cleared. Denise had threatened one hospital administrator badly enough that he stopped asking whether security should wait outside the room. And Miss Laverne had arrived carrying a grocery bag full of clean nightgowns, hair oil, and the kind of pound cake people bring when they cannot fix the world but refuse to come empty-handed. Seo-jin entered alone because Naomi had demanded it through Hae-rin, and because every guard in the hallway already knew the new rule. No one crossed Naomi Brooks's threshold by rank, bloodline, or habit. They crossed it by permission. He stopped just inside the room, not dramatically, not like a man arriving to claim what was his, but like a man finally understanding he had entered a place where his power meant less than his patience. Naomi sat propped against pillows in the clean nightgown Miss Laverne had brought, her full body tired and wounded and entirely unhidden, Mina asleep against one side of her chest, and Malik bundled in the bassinet beside the bed. Seo-jin's eyes moved first to the babies. then to Naomi's bandaged abdomen, then to her face, and whatever apology he had prepared did not survive the sight of what his world had asked her to carry alone. "Before you say anything," Naomi said, her voice rough from the night, but steady enough to hold him still, "I need you to understand that I did not hide them because I wanted to punish you. I hid them because every door back to you had someone dangerous standing behind it. And because you taught me, in our marriage, that if I entered your world scared, you would make decisions around me instead of with me." Seo Jin accepted that without defending himself, and the restraint cost him more than any denial would have. He told her what had happened in the archive, what the council had signed, what Min-Kyu had confessed, and what Jang had attempted at the ports, but he did not turn the story into a performance of his own suffering. When he finished, Naomi asked for the one thing the old version of him would have avoided by offering money, houses, guards, and quiet arrangements instead. She asked what would change in the structure that had made all of this possible. Seo Jin looked at Malik in the bassinet, at the tiny tiger bracelet now sealed in an evidence bag on the bedside table, and said the Han Council would lose guardianship authority permanently. Min-Kyu would testify in both jurisdictions under protection he had not earned but would receive, because truth mattered more than revenge, and any recognition of the twins would be filed first through Naomi's legal authority, not the family registry. The punishment did not arrive as one satisfying explosion, because real power rarely collapses that neatly. It arrived through frozen Foundation accounts, resigned elders, seized communications, public investigations, and captains who discovered that loyalty to an old council meant inheriting its crimes. Min-Kyu, stripped of titles and facing prosecution, gave testimony that named every signature, every courier, every shell payment, and every false report buried during Naomi's pregnancy. Jang Ki-moon lost 3 port routes in the fallout, not to Seo Jin's revenge, but to the inspection trap his own move had triggered. The men from the alley were arrested after depot footage placed them at the scene, and the forged custody form became the document that destroyed the council's last respectable lie. None of it erased the months Naomi had spent looking over her shoulder, but it made those months matter in a language courts, newspapers, and crime families could not easily ignore. 3 weeks later, Naomi stood on the back porch of a rented house outside Atlanta with Malik asleep in Seo Jin's arms and Mina tucked against her own shoulder, watching rain soften the yard into silver. Seo Jin had not asked her to return to Seoul. He had not asked to move in. He had not offered protection as a cage with better furniture. He came every morning with coffee, legal updates, and clean bottles, then left when she told him the babies needed quiet, learning the daily humility of being useful without being in charge. Naomi noticed the effort, but she did not reward it too quickly. Some wounds deserved time, and some trust had to be rebuilt through small repeated proofs. A door left open, a decision asked instead of made, a silence that did not hide danger. That evening, while Denise and Miss Laverne argued in the kitchen about whether Korean seaweed soup could be improved with smoked turkey, Seo Jin sat beside Naomi on the porch steps and held Malik with both hands exactly the way she had taught him. "I thought protection meant keeping fear away from you," he said, watching his son's fingers curl around the edge of his shirt. "I know now it means never making you stand outside the truth again." Naomi looked at him for a long moment, then adjusted Mina's blanket against the breeze and let her shoulder rest against his, not as forgiveness fully completed, and not as a promise that love would become simple after everything it had survived. It was only a beginning, but it was honest, and after months of forged signatures, locked channels, and men deciding her fate in rooms she was never meant to enter, honest felt like the safest place her children had ever slept.